My son called me a financial burden at his own dinner table. Those were the exact words. Financial burden. I had paid off that house. I had signed those papers. I had kept quiet about it for 6 years because I loved him and I thought love was enough. I was wrong about that. But I was not wrong about the call I made the following morning or the document that arrived by the end of the week. I want you to picture that dinner table for a moment. The plates were full. The grandchildren were talking over each other the way children do. His wife was refilling glasses. And my son, my own son, looked across at me with the kind of casual certainty that only comes when someone has forgotten to be afraid of what you know. And he said those words like they were simply true. Like they had always been true. Like I was a guest who had forgotten her place. I did not argue. I did not cry. I folded my napkin, set it beside my plate, and excused myself from the table. I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed in the quiet. And then I opened a drawer I had not opened in 2 years and found a number written in my late husband's handwriting on a folded piece of paper. Before I go any further, I want to say something to whoever is watching this. If you have ever been made to feel small by someone you spent your whole life making room for, this story is for you. Take a moment and hit the like button if you are already feeling something. And if you are new here, please subscribe, because the stories I share on this channel are about real things, quiet things, the kind of things that change slowly and then all at once. Now let me tell you who I am, and then let me tell you everything. My name does not matter as much as my situation, so I will describe myself this way. I am a woman in my late 60s. I raised 2 children, my son Marcus and his younger sister, largely on my own after my husband Raymond became ill. Raymond was a good man, methodical and careful in ways I did not always appreciate when I was younger and in a hurry. He worked in property management for most of his career. He understood documents the way some people understand weather, instinctively, by reading small signs others missed. When he got sick, he spent a portion of his final months not resting the way I begged him to, but sitting at our kitchen table going through papers, making calls, updating things I did not fully understand at the time. I was not a woman who handled finances. That had always been Raymond's territory. I handled everything else, the children, the house, the cooking, the appointments, the invisible architecture of a family's daily life. We had an arrangement that worked for 31 years. When he died, I inherited the grief and the paperwork in equal measure, and I was not prepared for either. But Raymond had prepared me, even if I did not know it yet. I worked as an administrator at a medical practice for 22 years. I was not a woman of great means, but I was careful. I saved where I could. I did not spend on things I did not need. And when Raymond passed and I found myself alone in a house that suddenly felt enormous, I had something most people in my position do not have. I had a modest amount of savings, a fully paid property, and a lawyer named Gerald who had handled Raymond's affairs for years and who called me 3 weeks after the funeral to make sure I understood everything Raymond had left in order. I did not understand it all then. I would understand it fully later. But Gerald told me one thing that I held on to even when I did not know why. He said, keep the original. Whatever happens, whatever anyone asks you to sign, come to me first. I nodded and thought he was being professionally cautious. I did not know he was handing me the thing that would one day matter most. Marcus came to me about a year after Raymond died. He was 34 then, newly married to a woman named Diane, and they were struggling in the way young couples struggle when they want a life that is slightly larger than their income. They were renting an apartment on the other side of the city. Diane was pregnant with their first child. Marcus sat across from me at that same kitchen table, the one where he had eaten breakfast for 18 years, and he told me he was worried about the future. I listened. That is what mothers do. He asked if I had ever considered the idea of them moving in. Not to take over, he said quickly. Just to help. He and Diane could contribute to the household. They would share expenses. The baby would have space. And I would not be alone in a house that was, as he put it gently, more than one person needed. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I talked to Gerald, and then I said yes, because I loved my son and because the house felt empty and because I believed, with the certainty of someone who had not yet learned to be careful with that particular belief, that family takes care of family. What I did not tell Marcus, because Gerald advised me not to complicate the arrangement with details he might resist, was that when we formalized the transfer of the property into a shared structure, I retained what is called a life estate interest. In plain language, it meant the house could not be sold, refinanced, or transferred in any meaningful way without my written consent. Gerald had insisted on it. Raymond, I later learned, had specifically discussed this possibility with Gerald before he died, as though he had seen something coming that I could not yet see. The first 2 years were good, or at least they were good enough. Diane and I found our rhythm. Marcus worked long hours. The grandchildren arrived, first one and then another, and the house filled with the kind of noise that makes emptiness impossible. I cooked. I helped with the children. I paid for things quietly, groceries, a new water heater, school supplies, because it felt natural and because I did not want anyone to feel the weight of my presence as a cost. I see now that this was where I made my mistake. Not the generosity itself, but the silence around it. I never said, I bought this. I never said, I paid for that. I never said, remember that I am here not because you allowed me, but because I chose to stay and because this house still carries my name in places you have not looked. I was too busy being a mother to be a strategist. Things began to shift in the 3rd year. Looking back, I can trace it almost precisely. Diane began making decisions about the house without mentioning them to me. A shelf I had kept in the hallway for 30 years disappeared one weekend while I was visiting a friend. When I asked about it, she said she had reorganized and hoped I did not mind, and her tone made it clear that whether I minded was not really the question. Marcus began referring to the house in ways that unsettled me without my being able to explain exactly why. He would say our place when talking to friends on the phone. He would say when we renovate this kitchen or when we sort out the back garden, using AOE that somehow did not include me. I told myself this was natural. They were building their life. I was the elder in the house and elders sometimes have to make room. I told myself I was being sensitive. I told myself Raymond would have told me not to make trouble. But then there was the evening with the folder. I came downstairs for a glass of water around 9 o'clock. Marcus and Diane were at the kitchen table. They were leaning over a folder of papers, speaking quietly and with a focus that felt serious. When I walked in, Marcus looked up. Diane closed the folder. Not slowly, not casually. She put her hand on it and closed it. Marcus smiled and asked if I needed anything. I said no, just water, and I went back upstairs. I lay awake that night thinking about the logo I had glimpsed on the folder's corner before Diane's hand covered it. I had seen it before. I could not place it. I told myself it was nothing. I almost believed myself. The birthday dinner happened about 4 months after that. Marcus's wife's family came over, and some of our neighbors, and it was the kind of evening that should have been warm and simple. Somewhere between the main course and dessert, Marcus made a comment. He did not shout it. He did not seem to intend it as an attack. He said, to no one in particular but in my direction, that his mother was lucky to have a place to land at her age, that not everyone was so fortunate. Someone laughed. Someone else changed the subject quickly. I smiled and reached for my wine glass. But something changed in me at that table. Something that had been soft became harder. Not angry exactly. More like decided. I had been making allowances for years because I loved this man and because I remembered the boy he used to be, the one who cried when Raymond was sick and held my hand at the funeral and told me he would take care of things. I had been giving that boy the benefit of every doubt. But the man at the head of that table was not asking for my benefit anymore. He was assuming it. And that is a different thing entirely. I thought about what Raymond used to say when a situation became unclear. He would say, go back to the document. Everything else is noise. I started paying closer attention. Over the following weeks, I noticed things I had been too generous to notice before. Diane asked me twice, in the guise of carrying conversation, whether I had given any thought to what my long-term plan was. She mentioned a friend whose mother had found a beautiful retirement community. She said it with a warmth that did not quite reach her eyes. I answered pleasantly and said I was very happy where I was. She nodded and smiled and the conversation moved on, but I noticed. Marcus began disappearing on weekend mornings for what he called errands. He was vague about them in a way he had not been before. He started making calls in the backyard with the door pulled shut behind him. One afternoon, I watched him from the upstairs window speaking to someone on his phone with a kind of urgent attention that did not look like someone arranging groceries. And then the mail. I noticed first that a letter I was expecting from my pension administrator had not arrived. Then a bank statement seemed to be missing. I checked with my bank online and confirmed the statement had been generated. I waited another week. It did not appear. I went to the post office in person and asked a quiet question. The woman behind the counter checked her records and told me that a mail forwarding request had been submitted for my address approximately 6 weeks prior. She asked if I had submitted it. I told her I had not. She looked at me with an expression that was professional and careful, and she told me I could file to have it reversed immediately. I thanked her and walked to my car and sat there for a long time. This was no longer about manners. This was not about a shelf moved without asking or a comment at a dinner table. Someone had physically redirected my mail. Someone had been deciding what I was allowed to receive in my own home. I went back inside that evening and I behaved exactly as I always had. I made dinner. I asked the grandchildren about their day. I helped with the dishes. And that night I called Gerald. He answered on the second ring. I told him I needed to come in. I told him I thought something was being arranged without my knowledge. He was quiet for a moment in the way Gerald is always quiet when something requires his full attention. And then he said, "Bring the original document. Come tomorrow if you can." I brought it. Gerald laid everything out on his desk with the calm efficiency of a man who has spent 40 years untangling what other people have quietly knotted. He confirmed what I had held in that drawer for 6 years. The life estate interest was intact, properly filed, and legally unambiguous. Any attempt to refinance, sell, or materially transfer the property required my written consent and my signature witnessed before a notary. No such consent had ever been given. No such signature existed. He also told me something I had not known. He had received an inquiry 3 months prior from a solicitor representing an unnamed party, asking general questions about the property's ownership structure. Gerald had responded with careful neutrality, providing only public information. But the nature of the questions, he said, told him someone was trying to understand whether there was a clean path around me. He had not called me then because he was not certain. He was certain now. I asked him what my options were. He listed them without drama. I listened to each one. And when he finished, I told him what I wanted to do. I did not want to destroy my son. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. I was not sitting in that office planning revenge. I was planning clarity. There is a difference. Revenge wants the other person to suffer. Clarity simply requires them to see. I went home and I waited. I let another week pass. I watched Marcus finalize what I now understood was a meeting with a lending institution, a refinancing arrangement that would release substantial equity from the property. He mentioned it to me in passing one evening, framed as a routine financial update. Nothing I needed to worry about. I said that sounded sensible and asked if he wanted more tea. I watched Ian sketch out renovation ideas at the kitchen table. She showed me a picture of new cabinetry she liked. I said it was beautiful. I meant it. The cabinetry was beautiful. Everything else about what was happening was not. The document arrived on a Thursday. Gerald's office called to confirm it was ready. I drove over, collected it, and drove home. I set it on the kitchen counter in a plain folder, and I made dinner, and I waited until the children were in bed. Then I asked Marcus and Diane to sit with me. They sat. Marcus looked mildly curious. Diane looked mildly alert in the way someone looks when they are trying to appear relaxed. I placed the folder on the table between us. I did not open it immediately. I told them I had been to see Gerald. I said I wanted to make sure everyone had the same understanding of the property arrangement, because I cared about this family and I did not want there to be any confusion going forward. Marcus started to say something light and dismissive. I raised my hand gently, the way I used to when he was a boy and not yet finished with his homework. He stopped. I opened the folder. I explained the life estate interest in plain language. I explained what it meant for the refinancing appointment scheduled for the following Tuesday. I explained that without my signature, which I had not given and would not be giving under the current circumstances, that appointment could not produce any legally binding result. I watched his face move through several things in quick succession. Confusion first, then calculation, then something that looked almost like the face of a boy who has just understood that he has made a very serious mistake. Diane said nothing. She looked at the table. I told them I was not interested in making this into something ugly. I told them that I had loved living in this house with their family and that I wanted to continue to do so. But I also told them, clearly and without raising my voice, that I would not be described as a burden in a house that I had paid for, that I would not have my mail redirected without my knowledge, that I would not be managed out of my own life by people I had given everything to make comfortable. The silence that followed was the longest silence I have sat in since the day Raymond died. Marcus apologized. Not that night. That night he sat very still and said very little, which I understood was its own kind of response. But 4 days later he came to find me in the garden. He sat beside me on the bench Raymond had built and he said he was sorry, that he had let things go in a direction he was not proud of, that he had told himself it was practical and reasonable, but he knew it was not right. It was not the most complete apology I have ever received, but it was real. I could tell the difference. The bank appointment was canceled. The renovation plans were set aside. The mail forwarding was reversed. Dinner became a quieter thing, more careful, but also more honest. Diane and I found our way to a different kind of arrangement, not warm exactly, not what I would have wished for, but functional and civil and free of pretense. That was enough. That was more than enough. I still live in that house. I chose to. I want to be very clear that it was a choice and not a concession, because the difference between those two things is the whole point. The document is back in the drawer. I do not carry it with me anymore. I do not need to. There is an understanding in that house now that did not exist before. An understanding that was purchased not through argument or anger, but through one quiet call and one folder placed on a kitchen table without drama. I have thought many times about what Raymond would say if he could see how things unfolded. I think he would not say very much. He was not a man who needed to say, "I told you so." He was a man who prepared carefully and trusted the preparation to speak when the time came. He was right to do it. He was right about almost everything in the patient, quiet way that certain people are right about things long before anyone else catches up. What I know now, that I wish I had understood sooner, is that love does not require silence. Being generous does not mean being invisible. Being a mother, being an elder, being the one who holds things together quietly for decades, none of that obligates you to disappear when someone decides your presence is inconvenient. You are allowed to stand in the room you built. You are allowed to hold the thing that is yours. And if someone forgets that, sometimes the kindest thing you can do for them and for yourself is to remember it on their behalf.